Right. I've changed microphones. I've changed back to the Bureau webcam, which is this one instead of that one. Which is very strange. I think this new camera may need some updates, but the software is only for Windows, so I'll have to plug it into another machine to update it. The tea never lasts that long. Right. Well, I'm gonna see if we can do this. Which may need a bit of fiddling with. I will need to get the other screwdrivers and possibly pliers. Let's have a look. The advantage of not putting the case on properly is it makes it a little bit easier to take it off again. Get my keyboard out. Take the shielding off. Right. I have a feeling possibly the only thing holding the board in is the transformer. There we go. Let's see if we can get the podule out. There we go. That's why the podule is so hard to work on, is wait for this to load again. There we go. There we go, there's the pin headers that actually connect the 8-bit podules into place, because these are the mini podules as opposed to the full-size ones. Now, I've got a feeling to take this off, we'll have to deal with the grommets. Power isn't a major problem. But I've got a feeling we're going to have to take all the standoffs for the that is actually soldered in, G-pin. It's called an Adelaide. What it was in classic Acorn tradition, the A3010, 20 and the A4000 were designed as a cut down version of the A5000. Now the A5000 had an ARM3, and it then had the MEMEC 1A memory processor, the IOC input output controller, and I'm trying to remember what the other one is, but basically it's a 4-chip chipset processor. Oh, VIDC. So you've got the VIDC, which is the video integrated display controller. You've also got the MEMEC memory controller and the IOC input output controller, which, as you can imagine, is quite an expensive chipset. So the A5000 had a 25 MHz ARM3 and then later a 30 or 33 MHz ARM3 with all these custom chips. So when they came to produce the 3010, the 3020 and the 4000, they produced basically a system on a chip. So the memory controller, the IO controller, the display controller and the ARM2 would all be integrated into one chip. In classic Acorn fashion, the chip was not ready to be fabbed when the machines went on sale, at least the 3010. They were aiming for a pre-Christmas launch to try and get some Christmas sales, and there was no silicon for what was to become the ARM250. So the Adelaide was designed, which is basically all the chips that are integrated into the ARM250 as their original separate ones on a daughter board shoved on the motherboard. So this would become one quad flat pack in the later models that would be mounted in the centre of the board. But the board was designed to have the Adelaide on top in case the chip wasn't ready. It wasn't ready, and then you got this. If I remember correctly, I think this one's the ARM, this one's for the MEMEC, That one's the VIDC and that's the IOC. But basically, everything that would be, if you were to look at my A5000 board, everything that would be scattered around the board in its right places was centralised and then put on this board until the chip was ready, just to make life fun. Right. So the question is... Oh, Acorn were always doing the cobbled together solutions. As I said in the last stream, when the Master 128 went on sale, they could produce the boards, they could produce the casings. They couldn't get the power supplies in quick enough, because the power supply in the BBC is a separate module that goes down the side of the motherboard, and they literally had to air freight power supplies in to keep up with production. They had everything else, but they couldn't get the power supplies. I think they were Antex, but they were literally having to air freight them in from, I think, Taiwan, to keep the production line going, because they hadn't expected the orders they got. The production line in Britain could meet the production numbers, but they just couldn't get the power supplies from the OEM. And as I said, it wasn't a production issue. The OEM could produce the power supplies in time. It was shipping issues. One of the comments on the last stream was, a very British way of doing it, but Acorn at the time was still completely owned by Olivetti. So, as I said at the other day, we can blame the Italians. But we have some fun bits, like you can see there's a hybrid board here, which is actually part of the audio subsystem. On these machines, all the way up to RISC PC, Acorns have 8-bit, 8-channel stereo audio. On the RISC PC, there's a header on the board, and if you pull the jumpers off the header, you can put a 16-bit upgrade on it and upgrade to 16-bit audio, just with a little board about that big, with, I think it's a new DAC and a new amp on it, but that's basically it. That's how the audio subsystem was upgraded. As you can see, this is an actual revision 1 board, which hence the Adelaide. I don't know if there were different revisions. I think there were. But as you can see, it's a very compact board for what it's doing. The A5000's board is actually the same width but slightly longer, but it doesn't have a power supply. The power supply is separate. So this board basically integrates everything where possible, and then they stuck in because this was the home computer, they put an RS modulator in. You can see how much room that takes up. As I said last stream, some of the labelling on the board is interesting. You get PL5 for the power supply, but the speaker is just down as link. In this case, link 19. It doesn't get a PL for a plug. It gets now a link the same as any of the other jumpers on the board, and it's like, but it's a speaker connector, it's not a jumper. Some of the other weirdness of this, as you go back a level, the A3000 had 2 podule slots. It introduced the mini podule, which is this bank of headers just there, but it also had a full-size podule on the back, so you could get a case that you'd bolt in from underneath that would allow you to put in one of the full-size podules from the A400 or A300 series, but it would stick out the back by the podules were about that long. So you'd have a machine this big and then a box on the back with whatever you had plugged in, and of course some people produced a stacked card to give you 2 sockets, so you could have 3 podules in total, 1 mini and 2 full size. It's always been the 3010, 20 and 4000 were always designed as a cost cut machine. The A4000 is in a similar case to the 5000, so it's a 3-box design keyboard, machine and monitor. But if you fit a podule, you can't fit a hard drive, and if you fit a hard drive, you can't fit a podule. There is not enough room in the casing to have both systems fitted at once. You can either have a 3.5-inch hard drive, which sits here on the board, or you can have a podule that sits there, but the 2 units overlap. These days, that actually is not so much of a problem. This is a 90, if I remember correctly, this is a 93 design, I think. Let's have a look if we've got any. I can't do a Mackenzie and stick extra glasses on. I'm looking for some production date codes. I mean, to give you an idea, these are This is RISC OS 3.1. So this is a 1992 operating system, but I think this is a 1994 revision when this was produced. The first Archimedes was 1987, the first ARM was 1986, because the first ARMs were not produced as their own computers. They were designed on the BBC. The ARM1 was produced, and the very first production silicon by VLSI worked. And was put in a second processor box connected to a BBC and used. Yeah, that's why I think this is a 94 revision. Remark 1 3020 I think is a 94 design, but yeah, the first ARM was basically turned into a second processor for the Beeb, hooked into that, and there were, I think, 8 of them. And they used the ARM on the BBC to design the ARM2 that would then go into the Archimedes. So the first computer did not use the first revision of the processor, it used the second revision of the processor, which had been designed on the first revision of the processor. Just in that traditional Acorn style of we don't have any money. I'll leave you to imagine the speed difference, even with a master, with a 65C102, between a 4 MHz 65C102 that's the main processor and also doing your I/O and memory and video processing, and that same system with a 4 MHz 32 or technically 26-bit ARM on the tube processor, where the ARM is doing all the processing and the 65C02 is doing all the input-output. It was so much faster, that's why they designed the ARM2 on it. I think it was quoted as something like 10 to 12 times faster than the Beeb it was plugged into at doing the same job. Hence, you know, if you had that sort of processing increase available, I'm pretty sure you'd take that choice of, yep, we'll design it on that one. But the BBC was always designed with multiple processors, even when it was not designed, when it was the idea for the Proton that would have been a replacement for the Acorn Atom. It was always designed to be able to have second processors, and the 4 official second processors are a second 6502, which of course would massively increase your speed because you'd have one 6502 with 64k of RAM as your processing processor, and one 6502 with 32k of RAM, 32k of ROM, and all the input-output hooked to it, talking together. The only main... There were a few programs that would use it, but the one everyone knows is Elite. You could run Elite on the BBC, but it had a second processor enhanced version if you had a 6502 second processor, and that was massively enhanced compared. The BBC Master version is more enhanced. In fact, there are actually listed as 4 BBC versions, which are basically known as standard, second processor, enhanced for Master, and then the Enterprise version, which has a few bug fixes. But so you had basically a twin of the BBC's processor. You could have a Z80 processor, which meant you could boot CPM. So again, the Beeb would 6502 would handle all the I/O, the Z80 would handle CPM and just talked across the tube for whenever it needed to do anything, display, input, output, whatever. So the tube was constantly in action. If you were word processing in WordStar, you'd have letters going into the tube from the keyboard via the 6502, and then the screen updates coming the other way into the 6502 to be written into screen memory and on the screen. The next one was the NS. Originally, it was the NS16032. The NS16032, which was actually a 32-bit processor. So they decided it was a stupid name, so they renamed it to the NS32016, just reversing the numbers. And that was designed as a scientific workstation system. The Master could have a 65102 internally as a tube, which gave you DOS compatibility. And then there was the ARM, but the ARM wasn't sold. So all the others you could buy, but the ARM one was never sold as its own option, because by the time that came about, A, VLSI was now producing ARM2s, and B, buying Archimedes. One of the silly things is this is actually where I first got into emulation, because every single Archimedes came with 2 emulators called Pling 6502 or Pling BBEM, emulating a BBC micro. So you could take software that was properly written for the BBC, get it onto an Archimedes, and it should run through the emulator that Acorn supplied with the machine. You know, it's not quite as stupid as the Commodore solution of the 128 isn't compatible with a 64, so let's build an entire 64 in hardware into the machine. But that's the first software emulator I ever used, was here's BBEM. If you have some simple educational software, it will probably work through it, and you can run it on the newer computers. It's no good for games, but because, as you can imagine, most of the games on the Beeb do not use legal access methods. Most of them hit the hardware directly and start running from there. But for simple stuff, yeah, there was an emulator on one of the floppy disks that came with your machine, and that's true even on RISC OS. I think even RISC OS 4 has BBEM on its accessories disk. It's not built into the ROM like Paint and Write, but yeah, everyone got it just in case. So I'm trying to think how I'm going to get these off the back, because I've got a feeling every single one of these mounts is going to have to come undone. What's really funny, Swarm, is what happened, why ARM was born. Does anyone actually know the story of ARM? Because it's really stupid when you consider Apple. Right. When the newer version of the ARM came out after the ARM 3, it was designated the ARM 600, and it was going to go into the RISC PC. Apple was looking at producing a PDA. It's what would become the Newton. And they were looking for a low-power processor that could be modified to have hardware handwriting recognition. And they came across the ARM. But in the UK, ARM and Apple were competitors in the education market. ARM and Acorn were competitors. Apple was actually the smaller company in UK education. And Apple's not going to buy processors off Acorn. They're a competitor. It'd be like Intel buying chips off AMD. So they came to an agreement that Acorn would spin ARM off into its own company. Acorn would take 40% of the shares and put in some budget. Apple would take 40% of the shares and put in some budget. And VLSI, who of course were making the chips, would take the other 20%, and there's your 100% of the new company. So this is when the Acorn RISC machine becomes the advanced RISC machine. ARM is set up, they design a newer version of the chip, it's now based on the 610 ARM, and it goes into the Apple Newton. And after about 9 months, Steve Jobs comes back to Apple. It's not an Apple product really, so it's one of the programs, along with the licensing of Mac OS to third parties. It's one of the projects he cans. And Apple shares all their shares in ARM. So ARM is now basically 40% Acorn, 20% VLSI, and 40% private investors. This has the twin outcomes of Apple is now licensing back the technology they used to own, because they don't have any shares in ARM. If they kept those shares in ARM, they wouldn't have even had to get a license to produce Apple Silicon, because they would have owned that. They would have been a massive stakeholder in ARM. But the secondary silly one is what actually caused the collapse of Acorn, because the ARM chips became so popular that when Acorn was designing the Phoebe, and one day I'll get my Phoebe case out of the loft, they produced 150, I think, Phoebe cases, but only 2 prototype boards of 2 different designs. One, I know one works, but the other one, not so sure. Acorn basically was decided that they wouldn't sell enough. If they completed the design of the RISC PC2, the Phoebe, they wouldn't sell enough to make the money back, so it's decided to close Acorn. And everyone who had a share in Acorn had it swapped for a share in ARM. And at the time, ARM was worth somewhere in the region of 12 times the value per share than Acorn was. So the people who had shares in Acorn were laughing. Acorn shut down, and well, ARM. This is when ARM got its nickname of the Fabulous Wonder, because they don't produce chips; they produce designs. You know, if you get an ARM license, or you decide to integrate an ARM, and you get a license production, ARM will help you design your silicon. They will help you design the integration between whatever GPU you're looking at and a CPU, and how you want to integrate it into a chip. But they don't make any chips themselves. Versus Acorn, who literally designed the thing, had VLSI build them, and literally were killed by their own son. You know, it's literally a case of regicide. Our spin-off company has become so popular, it's not worth us being in business anymore. Bye. Let's see if see if I can get that. This is the sort of thing that was so common. One of the sort of jokes with UK industry is we're really good at in designing something and then getting someone else to produce it. APT is another good example, advanced passenger train. How do you get a train to run really fast on twisty tracks? Well, you take a design from a motorcycle and lean in so that you can take a curve at a higher speed, but your passengers don't get thrown to the side. We got people who, you know, were experts in just coming out of university, who, you know, would be hovercraft designers and aircraft designers and absolutely high-end boffin types, and they designed the system so perfectly it cancelled out all the movement, which made everyone get travel sick, because your eyes say we've just moved and your ears say no you don't, we didn't. Perfect combination for motion sickness. We sold the technology. We decided, you know, we can't go any further. We sold the technology. The technology would end up with a couple of companies, but the primary one was an Italian company, and we would buy it back as a Pendolino and run it on the West Coast Main Line, where we had intended to run the APT in the first place. We got a couple of new depots and maintenance facilities out of it, but yeah, we literally designed something, sold it to someone, and bought it back. Well, I can't remember who owns ARM at the moment, but it's not us anymore. I have a plastic standoff here, and as far as I can tell, I think everything else, the board just sits held by the back end. Oh, that combination of stupidness is a very British 20th century design situation. We design something, we can't afford to keep investing in it, we give it to someone else and end up buying it back from them. You'd think I'd have a pair of pliers. I'll just be a second while I get some extra tools. Let's see if one of these fits. Yeah, it's still with SoftBank. Okay, yeah, doesn't surprise me. I remember SoftBank buying them, but I couldn't remember if they'd sold any of it. Bigger than that. Bigger than that. There we go. There we go. So there's the back of the machine. I'm going to try and remove the board, clean it up a little, and if possible remove the battery. And hence a bit you can't see. One soldering iron. You know, unlike these people who do electronics a lot, I don't have things like a temperature controlled iron. I just have a cheap Antex that I got years and years and years and years ago. As this one has the least damage, it makes sense to try and contain the damage now while it is still minimal. The 2030 and the RISC PC are going to need serious work, which basically means Simon. Yeah, this is the Antec is Swarm is like that. It's on the end of it is a standard mains plug. This is a it's an XS25, so I'm assuming it's 25 watt iron because they tend to be boring like that in the model numbers. Right, that's got the board loose. That was not brilliant. There we go, there's the main board. So let's have a look on the bottom. Oh look, bodge wires. You can tell this is a Mark 1 board, can't you? But we have just for one via that has corrosion. You can see where the other damage from the battery is, but it hasn't actually spread to anything. It's mostly on the top. So this is the traditional raccoon drink. No, the Coke is definitely for the raccoon, not the acorn. Let's have a quick look at the other side. This is one of the other bits where Acorn was quite good. That via that's actually damaged isn't actually used. It's designed for the larger battery type. So you have two, I'm trying to remember which size it is. That should be the negative. So you have two negatives and two positives. The two positives are used to support the battery, and then the negative would go on the other side. So let's see the best place to get some power. When I had the computer room wired when I bought the house, I put in a lot of sockets. There are somewhere in the region of 14 double sockets in this room alone. Now the traditional bit where we wait for the iron to warm up. Yes, I've got people beeping. It's warming up, I can smell it. It's not just the sockets around the wall swarm. This room is actually on its own ring. You can turn off the rest of the house and this room will keep working. I didn't want to have to turn off my business because I want to do some electrical work on the house. So this room takes a feed off after the meter downstairs. The main feed actually splits. So if you pull the main breaker on the distribution board, you can cut off the entire house and the main sockets in here will still work. There is also a changeover switch up here that runs from a 16 amp commander plug in the garden, so you can put a generator in the garden and run this room completely separate to the house if need be. It was one of those cases of, if you're building your business into a house, you might as well put all the stuff you might need in the future in first, rather than have to shut it down to do the work later. So the only thing in here that is shared with the house is the main lights in the ceiling. But the light that's currently illuminating me and the desk is actually just a plug-in one. So it will work if I turn the rest of the house off. As I said before, I've got quite a large solar array on the roof, so when it's sunny, this entire room basically runs independent of the grid. Let's see if we can get this hot enough. Hi Ben. I had another camera arrive, so I decided to do a test. With the second camera. Right, now for the fun bit. Forget how long the leads on these things can be. I'm sorry, G-Pin, I don't have move facilities. I haven't used this soldering iron in almost 10 years, so it's just not worth me having those sort of tools. There we go, you can see how long the legs through the board are. Now I get to do the uniquely British trick of turning a soldering iron off without unplugging it from the wall. So, let's have a... there's a little bit of corrosion at the end of some of the components. It hasn't got to the CMOS itself, which is that one. The biggest worry is this diode package, but this should all be okay. You can see it's got all the way down to here, but it's not anywhere else. So the biggest problem is it's in the keyboard connector, which I'll have to figure out some way of getting something that can slide in and out to clean those. This is where Hi Majenko, this is where the Acorn design really comes into its own for when they screw up. Because on this one, there isn't really anything vital around the battery. They did give it quite a bit of room. Whereas on the A3010, it's up here with the parallel port, the audio circuitry, and the printer port. It's on the back as well, Majenko, but here you go. It's They didn't bother to put the arsehole on the back. They decided the arsehole would be in the t-shirt for these ones. Yeah, I do have the Simon's Cat plushie, by the way. For I was one of the Kickstarter backers for Simon's Cat goes to the vet, where you get a Simon's Cat plushie with a plushie collar, you know, the cone. And yes, when you turn the cat round, there is an arsehole sewn onto the cat. Oh, most of my t-shirts, MJ, are raccoon, animal or raccoon themed. Strangely enough, that's what I tell people to get me for Christmas presents and things like that, is, you know, try and find me a raccoon t-shirt. Yep, it's a genuine Varta. That was definitely going to go. Let's see if I can get some more of this damage up. So, there we go. I still can't believe they held the motherboard in with the damn transformer. Majenko and Ben, I have 4 missing parts down here marked X, Y and Y, which are C4, C5 and C7. Would you want to guess that they might have been planning to put 3 or some different reefers down here in the power supply? The outline is square. All the other capacitors, it's one of the things about the age of these, that before the capacitor plague, but not old enough to be life expired yet. No, Daft Punk, Acorn kept the Reefer Madness for the BBC itself. The linear power supply in the BBC is famous for, by now, if it hasn't blown, it's about to. And Majenko will, I'm sure, will quite happily tell us that it will do this at the opportune moment to fill whatever room you're in with an interesting smell. Pad for a third crystal? Whereabouts are you looking, G-Pin? You might have also noticed I've figured out how to turn the camera around so that it's the right way up for you now. Oh, those ones. Yeah, but it's not... There's absolutely nothing going to it. So I was looking... You've got to take into account this thing has 5 crystals as default. You've got one oscillator here, one here, the 2 there, but there is absolutely nothing wired to that pad, top or bottom. It doesn't even have a designation on the board. So we've got X3, X4. That one's X2, X1. So this one should be... Well, that one's X7, so there's a bit of room for some extra crystal action. I'm trying to see if I can see where any of the others would have been, because, like I said, that's 3, 4, 2 and 1. Of course, it could be under the Adelaide, because it could be that it was designed that it would be alongside the ARM250. This is my A3010 ARM2 desktop machine, heraldic, and Acorn put nicad batteries on the motherboards. So if you look carefully here, you will notice this pad is quite green because this battery has been leaking, and this is my least damaged machine. There's some damage into the keyboard, one of the keyboard connections here, and I've just noticed another bit I want to try and clean up over here. This had been sitting on its side, so I'm not entirely surprised that it's tried to go sideways. But the 3020 and my RIS PC are much more heavily damaged than this one, so this is more a case of trying to save this one before it gets too bad, rather than having to try and fix one that's damaged. To give you a bit of history that the others have had previously, the 3010 and the 3020 are sister models for different markets. So the 3010 was designed as a home machine, so you got twin Atari 9-pin joystick ports and a UHF modulator for TV use instead of a monitor. The A3020 was designed for education, so it didn't have any of those. It did have the ability to have a network interface here for Reconnect, and it had an on-board hard disk interface. Both of them are limited to 2 meg on the board. You can actually take it up to 4 meg because the memory controller will support 4 meg on them. In this generation of Acorn, if you want to go above 4 meg, the memory controller can only access 4 meg. The solution to this in the bigger machines is you just add more memory controllers, up to the ultimate stupidity of the first ARM3 machine, the A540, which had 4 meg on the board with 1 Memec A to control it, and 3 memory slots which could each take a 4 meg card with another Memec 1A to control it, so you could put 16 meg in that machine. To give you an idea, when that machine came out, the machine was about £4,000 and each memory card was at least £2,000 extra. It was not a big seller, but the people it did sell to were people like print houses. And you'd think, why would you buy, even in the UK, why would you buy an Acorn when for the print world, when you could buy an Apple, which, let's face it, is much more famous in the publishing industry at that point. And the answer is the printer. The Archimedes could have a laser direct printer connected, which was a Canon LBP without the serial and parallel interfaces working. Instead, it had a 50-pin connector on the back, and the rendering engine in the printer was connected directly to the expansion bus in the Archimedes. So this thing could churn out pages as fast as the printer could actually print them, because there was no bottleneck between the processing in the machine and the processing in the printer. You didn't have to convert it down to serial like with a Mac and squirt it out, you know, I think it was 19200 board, and you didn't have to do it 8-bit parallel on the. You just shot this thing out at literally at 16-bit and let the processor roll it. So there were quite a few print companies who would have every other machine in the building, but the one that produced the proofs that would then be turned into plates was an Archimedes just for speed. And they would spend the money on a really high-end Archimedes. As I said to people the other day, the reason I got my 540 when I had it was because it had been bought by one print house off another, and they only wanted the 21-inch Trinitron it was hooked to. They didn't care about the computer and the printer, they wanted the monitor. So I got the machine for free. And that was a tricked out 540. It had all 3 memory cards fitted. I had 16 meg in there, although eventually one Memec 1A would start playing up, and the fix was just take the card out, because it wasn't the onboard one. So I just took it down to 12 meg and it continued running. And for the longest time that was the fastest Archimedes you could buy. And you could also get it as a RISC workstation. So it's actually one of these stupid ones. I'm trying to remember who it was, but there was one scientific research, university research lab that were using time on a Cray to do the processing, and a RISC-IX machine to do the output, because the graphics subsystem was so much better on the Archimedes. You could put a high-resolution monitor on it with a VGA adapter, run it at 800 by 600 in 256 colours. So they were doing all this high-end vector processing and then squirting it out to an ARM3 to draw it. Right. Now the question is, do I try and put this back together? Or do I see if I can get Simon to get me a battery? You can see on this how long the legs are and where the corrosion is on the leg compared to the board. Yeah, so let's see if I can get a good shot. I probably can't on this camera. But the longest pins are, what, 3mm? The shortest is 2. Now, if I was a pro streamer, I'd put everything in boxes and that put them in 2 different places. And then not only would I forget about them, I'd find one bit and not the other when I come to put it back together. This hybrid board still intrigues me. I'd forgotten about that. It's one of those ones that's easy to note because it does actually say on the Acorn Audio, which does tell you it's quite a, it's definitely to do with the audio subsystem. It's nothing else. I think this is one of the original productions. I'd have to look at the back. Let's have a look. Well, that answers that. This is serial number 21. I think it's fair to say I won't be finding one earlier than this. Oh, Swarm, it's a rare one having an Adelaide at all. I didn't actually know this had an Adelaide in it. I've never actually... All the other ARM250 designs I've worked on have been ARM250s. I can't remember how long they used the Adelaide for, but it wasn't long to start with. Oh no, they all had the promotional stickers on them, it's just the original owner of this never peeled it off. Yeah, I'm going to leave them on there because they haven't discoloured, so what's the point of taking the promotional stickers off? It's a bit of history. But yeah, every A5 A3010 had that sticker on it. It's just normally the moment you bought it, you pulled it off. I'm actually really shocked that it hasn't gone weird colours, especially when you consider all the other stickers like the serial number, the power input, and the model sticker on the keyboard all go this interesting. They put it this way: when they launched, they were not yellow. But you can tell this is it's a bit of something, and I'm not going to put it in resin. Call it Dave. But you can tell how powerful RISC machines are by the fact that this needed a 0.2 amp input. Right. That's the entire insulating layer for the motherboard. That's all you get. Let's see if I can do this where the connectors for the power connector do not shoot out of the... No, that makes you sensible, Majenko, but you might take that as an insult. The main reason for putting it back together is, like I said, the entire board, apart from the I/O standoffs, is held in by two screws that go through the power supply into the transformer. So the transformer windings are a structural load on these machines. I was trying to see who made the caps. I'll have to ask other people, like Majenko. Jamicon? Yeah, the Ferrari did that on the F50. It's the reason why it was described as a race car for the road. Jamicon caps. Jamicon. I mean, it's old enough that it does predate the getting from the cheapest supplier you can find in China. Most caps providers I've never heard of, so that's why I thought if they were a make that was known, you might be familiar with them, whereas I wouldn't. You know, the only cap maker I can name off the top of my head is Nichicon, for the obvious reason that the normal comment is, "Oh, they're Nichicons, they'll be okay." I can understand now why they thought that only two screws into the transformer, which of course will take the load of a transformer quite nicely, would be sufficient given how many screws are actually holding the I/O ports to the metal plate. I mean, if you're going to stick 10 hex bolts into your board, I don't think it's going to move. I'm still impressed they bothered with the locking ring on the audio jack. I mean, it's a bugger to work with, but let's face it, I can understand it for a long-term point of view, because it's Acorn, they're used to dealing with kids with education. Stuff getting plugged in and that would take the rocket off the board, but it's just still so strange to actually have had that thought of, yeah, well, let's make sure we put in the locking ring on the audio jack. Oh no, they go through the bottom casing, they don't go in yet. Right, that's cold enough that I don't have to worry about it melting everything. Right, so now we need the bottom case, which is this one. Something not quite in the right place. Okay, that's going to be annoying. That looks better. One of the standoffs that, like this one that it clips into, there's one there, and one of them is under the board here. So you cannot see it because it clips into the tray, not the board. They need to mix with another company so they can become Teapot. It's not helped by the fact of this, it's not being lit by LED, it's being lit by an IKEA 60cm fluorescent tube. So although I have tried to synchronise the shutter speed, it is running at 50 Hz with a 50 Hz illumination, so there will be weirdness to do with the lighting. Yeah, that one still didn't go in. Let's take those out again. The test yesterday, I hadn't changed the camera. So the camera was running at 60 Hz and the light is running at 50 Hz. And so we got some wonderful rolling lines where constructive and destructive interference were happening on the rolling shutter. I'm using the same Biro for the look down camera, but it's now set to a 50 Hz local mains frequency instead of a 60 Hz, so that should have tidied up Oh, if you want a weird one, Majenko, the new camera I need to plug into a Windows machine to update the firmware, because it's only giving me 640 by 480 as an option, even though it's a 2K camera. But this will probably not surprise anyone to know that the update software is only available for Mac and Windows. You can tell when it's getting bad when you resort to getting the iFixit stuff out to get into it. But I knew that there would be a correct size hex driver for the for that one. Right, let's go. That's the hex driver, so that's the one in the middle. It's not that hex driver, it's the other one. There we go. Right, so I'm not going to bother putting that in. I'm going to very carefully see if I can line up the that doesn't feel lined up. I didn't bring the torch up from downstairs, so I'll have to do a bent. Which tells me I've got enough by 1 hour. That's in enough for now. It's a peripheral module, hence podules. And the fun one is that on the up to the A5000 you could get double width, so you could get, say, a full expanded A4040 which would have a 2x2 expansion backplane, so you could put 4 half podules in, well, 4 full podules in, or 2 double width, or 2 single width and 1 double width. The A5000 can do the same, but by the time you get to the RISC PC, no one was making twin double width podules, so it only has a single width unit, but it had the advantage that if you ran out of slots, you took the lid off, took 4 retaining pins out, put a new slice on top which could handle, and a new expansion backplane, and you'd go from 2 slots to 4 slots, and it would also take you from 1 3.5 and 1 5.25 inch bay to 1 3.5 and 1 5.25 in each slice, and each slice could also have its own power supply. So as you built the machine up, if you needed more storage, expansion or power, you'd just put another chunk into the machine. This did lead to one of the stupid outcomes at one of the trade shows, where they were showing off the the RIS PC, and they were basically saying how they called someone up from the crowd and said, look, even you can get into it within a couple of minutes, because to open the RIS PC, all you do is you take the front latches, twist them and pull them up, and then you take the lid off, and if you need to take the slice out, you do the lower latches in the same way. You swing them 90 degrees, take the pins out, and then take the unit out. And they commented to go, even you can open this in like 30 seconds, which caused a cry to come out from the crowd, because the guy that actually called up was Dave, who wrote for the micro user, and the pages he wrote were the bodybuilding course, and one of the comments was he's the guy who can open a BBC with its 4 screws in under 10 seconds, so if he can't open that instantly, there's something very, very wrong. There we go, before I forget that screw. This is the bit I hate, this clip is already broken. These are probably not long for this planet on this side. This one was always the one that broke first, because as you can see there's 3 on this side, 2 on this side, and if you don't get the podule cover in the right place, this one always breaks. Even when they were brand new, they broke. I have a feeling, because of this 3-screw open layout, that it wasn't just the form factor of the Amiga Acorn were copying with the 3000 series. I have a feeling, because of the screw layout is basically the same as the Amiga 500 as far as I'm aware, I've got a feeling that they looked at it and went, that's the way to do it, clips at the back, screws along the front. Well, hopefully this is a machine that's going to be saved from battery destruction. Another fun one of this is, as I've said before, they got Lexmark to build the keyboards, so they are very nice to type on, but it also means that you get this ironic situation of a British computer that has an American keyboard format. They never did the inverted L that you'd expect of this style of keyboard on a British machine. But when you're specifying your own keyboards, you get to make your own decisions, I guess. This is... well, I've needed 3 toolkits today to get into it, hasn't it? The other fun one is you'll notice that the pound sign's up here. So it really is an American layout, with a modification. The problem with a single height enter swarm is if you have nails. The number of times I hit return, because note this is return, enter's over there, they are separate keys on an Archimedes. Return and enter have 2 different functions. But there is a habit of going to hit enter and putting a pipe or a backslash into what you're typing, because your nail hits that one before the return key goes down. This isn't the example, but this is one of the reasons why I didn't actually learn to touch type when I was in school. They tried to get me, but even when I was at school, I was using so many different keyboard layouts, it wasn't worth touch typing, because the keys I type on, you know, because I was typing in programs and things, the majority of the keys I was using weren't the alphanumeric ones. You know, it's the brackets and the speech marks and the greater than and less than. Especially if you're typing in... one of the things that makes the BBC and the Archimedes really useful if you want to do high-speed processing is they've got a built-in assembler. Or if you on the BBC or on Archimedes, if you want to write machine code, you can write it in BASIC. You simply specify p% equals and the memory location you want to assemble at, and then each line of your program is literally the code. So you put in all your instructions line by line, and when you're finished you run the program and then save that block of memory, however long your program's going to be from where you started it, to the disk as the machine code. Which means that the alphanumeric characters aren't quite as important as like the hash symbol. Yeah, hash equals, you're going to use a lot more than most of the others. Yeah, it's one of the things that makes BBC Basic so powerful, is the fact that if you need speed, you just start typing in assembly, and off you go. There's your program, I'm finished. But you'll also notice the other things for them. The Acorn also use a Unix style keyboard, because the BBC, the Electron, and the Archimedes put the control key here. On the Electron, to save keys, tab and caps lock and function all share that key. But on the Archimedes, because they had more room, control goes here, caps lock goes there. So if you take my Sun keyboards, which are in the same layout, I can type on this faster than I can type into a PC when I'm needing extra commands, because the keys are in a different location. The other one that is, I think, unique to the Archimedes is this one. That's the universal currency symbol. I've never used it. Never ever had a need to use it. But it's actually typable directly with a shifted pound sign, because naturally, being a British computer, the pound sign is not a shifted character on this. But you can just stick the universal currency symbol in instead. Because there was no other choice on keyboards, you basically used the keyboard that came with an ARC. You'll also notice that they didn't bother to duplicate the cursor keys on the number pad. The number pad is literally just on or off as a number pad. We used to use this a lot. It's also one of the ones that used to confuse people, because the number pad to me is on the wrong side. A lot of people don't realise that the number pad shouldn't be on that side of the keyboard, because it's designed for an adding machine. And it's designed for an adding machine for people who are right-handed. So the idea is you're doing your account, you're going down your ledger, you've got your pen in your right hand, and your left hand is working on the adding machine, and what would have been the enter would have been the plus, or plus equals normally. So you'd key in the number, enter, key in the number, enter, while writing your results down in your, double entry bookkeeping ledger. And when it came to computers, they put it on this side of the keyboard, so technically that is on the wrong side. But my mum used to do a thing called the 5-star reward scheme, where pupils would do athletic competitions, so you do, triple jump, long jump, stuff like that. You would key it all into software on the BBC with their name, key in all their results, and so you put in the number of the event and then their results, and there'd be normally 3 results per event. And it would then calculate their best score and tell them what award they would have won, and then the system would even print out the order form for the teacher saying how many certificates they need of each type for them to fill in. So of course we'd do this last half term of the year, so Mum would be reading me out the pupils' information, I would be there the BBC master, because it has a number pad, and I would be the one doing the data entry, keying in all these results for all the kids in all the years, because Mum was head of Girls PE, so she got to do this for every female PE pupil, not just her class. She got to do it for everyone. So we might have 400 pupils to enter, and when we're finished, like I said, you'd hit a button, you'd go back to the main menu, and you'd go calculate and print, and off would go the FX80, and out would come, here's your order form for 5-star awards, you need X5s, X4s, X3s, X2s, X1s. You'd ship it off, you'd get them back, and then you'd handwrite in really neatly their name and stuff. The only problem we had was before they went over to more powerful machines, was we hit a problem where they had too many events to fit in the Beeb's memory, which was a bit of a pain because we were using a master which had the memory to do it, but the software had to run on a standard Beeb with 32K minus screen memory. The 5-star award was all written in mode 7, so you only lost 1K to screen memory and about half a K to the disk drive, but the master had shadow RAM and could replace that, so you actually had to have 2 different programs depending on which set of events you wanted to key it in with. And the other problem we hit was people getting divorced or married and keeping double-barreled names. And the double-barreled names were often too long to fit in the namespace on the Beeb. and the amount of complaints you would get from the parents if you had to reduce a double-barreled name to one or the other. And so we'd often have to use initial hyphen initial just to keep the parents happy. It's the fun of when you're dealing with these sort of things. Right, well, I'm going to actually leave this machine in here, I think, for now. I'll take the battery to Simon. Well, take the battery to Simon. I'll ask Simon to get me a battery, because it'll be a bit easier for him, because he has trade accounts with things like that. I wonder if we could get a better technology. I would fit the bigger varta that I put into the 5000, but that's the pad that's corroded, so... But yes, thank you all for coming. I hope the audio's been a bit better across since we swapped the camera. And I'll take the other camera to another machine and see about updating the software on it and see if we can get a better outcome. But now I know this can drive 2 cameras, and now I know that this camera can be reversed and going... Oh, we've had little bits where there were staticky sections, and it jumped to start with, but that was when I was using the camera microphone in what I'm using as the face camera, as opposed to the one that's looking down on the workbench, which Majenko will be happy to know is still being held up with gaffer tape. Yeah. Yes, the real fun one is the camera I got for the face camera has a shutter on it, and it really is the iris from Stargate. It's a 4-section iris. When you close the switch, it doesn't just flick a cover over the lens, it literally swings 4 quadrants in, so I don't have to... I could turn it off and not have to worry about Goa'uld sneaking in through my webcam. You can't say you're held down with gaffer tape, Majenko. We've seen you stand up. We know you have legs. You know, you're not Dara O'Brien, where no one knows that if you've got legs or not because they're never seen coming out from behind the desk. If the legs were AI, he'd have at least 5 of them, Ben. Advantages. Now, would that be a book, a cartoon? Episode of Star Trek? I'll have to have a listen to see what it comes up as. Well, anyway, thank you for everyone for joining. It's just approaching 90 minutes, so I think that'll do. Plus, I'll get off and let everyone have a drink and stuff before Shelby goes live. And I will have another go with this laptop, see if I can figure out what the audio is. What I'm planning on doing is, Fated has a Blue Yeti spare, so I'm probably going to pinch that as an external microphone and try that, but that will depend when I next get down to Birmingham. Right, well, take care everyone, and I will try and find where I left that stop streaming button.